Welcome back to the Run for God Bible in a Year podcast. You know, this is the only running-centric Bible reading program on the planet, and our goal is to help you get stronger physically, mentally, but most importantly, spiritually, as we read through the entire Bible in 365 days. Whether you're listening in your car or on your couch or while you're out running or walking, we know that the Word of God can transform us all. And it is my prayer that you're blessed by what we do here today. We are on day 163. We're going to continue our reading from 1 Kings chapter 7 and 2 Chronicles chapter 4. But before we get to that, we always have our tip of the day, right? Well, here's one that may not be for everybody, but just a thought. Maybe try some racing shoes. Maybe if you're somebody who has never tried on a pair of racing shoes, and you've got the disposable income to check that out and try that. I always feel so much better just before a race when I change my shoes, and I usually wear one extra article of clothing too, and I take that off. It makes me feel lighter and makes me feel better. And I don't know if it's a psychological thing or what, but it seems to help. So I don't know. Maybe try some racing shoes. Who knows? All right, let's get into God's Word. 1 Kings Chapter 7. Solomon completed his entire palace complex after 13 years of construction. He built the house of the forest of Lebanon. It was 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high on 4 rows of cedar pillars with cedar beams on top of the pillars. It was paneled above with cedar at the top of the chambers that rested on 45 pillars, 15 per row. There were 3 rows of window frames facing each other in 3 tiers. All the doors and doorposts had rectangular frames, the openings facing each other in 3 tiers. He made the hall of pillars 75 feet long and 45 feet wide. A portico was in front of the pillars, and a canopy with pillars was in front of them. He made the hall of the throne where he would judge the hall of judgment. He was paneled with cedar from the floor to the rafters. Solomon's own palace, where he would live, in the other courtyard behind the hall, was of similar construction, and he made a house like the hall for Pharaoh's daughter, his wife. All of these buildings were of costly stones, cut to size and sawed with saws on the inner and outer surfaces, from foundation to coping and from the outside to the great courtyard. The foundation was made up of large, costly stones, 12 and 15 feet long. Above were also costly stones cut to size, as well as cedar wood. Around the great courtyard, as well as the inner courtyard of the Lord's temple and the portico of the temple, there were 3 rows of dressed stone and a row of trimmed cedar beams. King Solomon had Hiram brought from Tyre. He was a widow's son from the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a bronze craftsman. Hiram had great skill, understanding, and knowledge to do every kind of bronze work, so he came to King Solomon and carried out all his work. He cast 2 hollow bronze pillars, each 27 feet high and 18 feet in circumference. He also made 2 capitals of cast bronze to set on top of the pillars. 7.5 feet was the height of the first capital, and 7.5 feet was also the height of the second capital. The capitals on top of the pillars had gratings of lattice work, wreaths made from chain work, 7 for the first capital and 7 for the second. He made the pillars with 2 encircling rows of pomegranates on the one grating to cover the capital on the top. He did the same for the second capital. And the capitals on top of the pillars in the portico were shaped like lilies 6 feet high. The capitals on the 2 pillars were also immediately above the rounded surface next to the grating, and 200 pomegranates were in rows encircling each capital. He set up pillars at the portico of the sanctuary. He set up the right pillar and named it Jachin, and then he set up the left pillar and named it Boaz. The tops of the pillars were shaped like lilies. Then the work of the pillars was completed. He made the cast metal reservoir 15 feet from brim to brim, perfectly round. It was 7.5 feet high and 45 feet in circumference. Ornamental gourds encircled it below the brim, 10 every half yard, completely encircling the reservoir. The gourds were cast in 2 rows when the reservoir was cast. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The reservoir was on top of them, and all their hindquarters were toward the center. The reservoir was 3 inches thick, and its rim was fashioned like the brim of a cup of a lily blossom. It held 11,000 gallons. Then he made 10 bronze water carts. Each water cart was 6 feet long, 6 feet wide, and 4.5 feet high. This was the design of the carts. They had frames. The frames were between the cross pieces, and on the frames between the cross pieces were lions, oxen, and cherubim. On the cross pieces there was a pedestal above, and below the lions and oxen were wreaths of hanging work. Each cart had 4 bronze wheels with bronze axles. Underneath the 4 corners of the basin were cast supports, each next to a wreath. And the water cart's opening inside the crown on the top was 18 inches wide. The opening was round, made as a pedestal 27 inches wide. On it were carvings, but their frames were square, not round. There were 4 wheels under the frames, and the wheel axles were part of the water cart. Each wheel was 27 inches tall. The wheel's design was similar to that of chariot wheels. Their axles, rims, spokes, and hubs were all of cast metal. 4 supports were at the 4 corners of each water cart. Each support was one piece with the water cart. At the top of the cart was a band 9 inches high encircling it. Also at the top of the cart, its braces and its frames were one piece with it. He engraved cherubim, lions, and palm trees on the plates of its braces and on its frames, wherever each had space with encircling wreaths. In this way, he made the 10 water carts using the same casting dimensions and shape for all of them. Then he made 10 bronze basins, each basin holding 220 gallons. In each was 6 feet wide, 1 basin for each of the 10 water carts. He set 5 water carts on the right side of the temple and 5 on the left side. He put the reservoir near the right side of the temple toward the southeast. Then Hiram made the basins, the shovels, and the sprinkling basins. So Hiram finished all the work that he was doing for King Solomon in the Lord's temple. 2 pillars, bowls for the capitals that were on top of the 2 pillars, the 2 gratings for covering both bowls of the capitals that were on top of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 gratings, 2 rows of pomegranates for each grating covering both capital bowls on top of the pillars, the 10 water carts, the 10 basins on the water carts, the reservoir, the 12 oxen underneath the reservoir, and the pots, shovels, and sprinkling basins. All the utensils that Hiram made for King Solomon at the Lord's temple were made of burnished bronze. The king had them cast in clay molds in the Jordan Valley between Succoth and Zarethan. Solomon left all the utensils unweighed because there were so many. The weight of the bronze was not determined. Solomon also made all the equipment in the Lord's temple, the gold altar, the gold table that the bread of the presence was placed on, the pure gold lampstands in front of the inner sanctuary, 5 on the right and 5 on the left, the gold flowers, lamps, and tongs, the pure gold ceremonial bowls, wick trimmers, sprinkling basins, ladles and fire pans, and the gold hinges for the doors of the inner temple, that is, the most holy place, and for the doors of the temple sanctuary. So all the work King Solomon did in the Lord's temple was completed. Then Solomon brought in the consecrated things of his father David, the silver, the gold, the utensils, and put them in the treasuries of the Lord's temple. 2 Chronicles chapter 4. He made a bronze altar 30 feet long and 30 feet wide and 15 feet high. Then he made the cast metal reservoir 15 feet from brim to brim, perfectly round. It was 7.5 feet high and 45 feet in circumference. The likeness of oxen was below it, completely encircling it, 10 every half yard, completely surrounding the reservoir. The oxen were cast in 2 rows when the reservoir was cast. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The reservoir was on top of them, and all their hindquarters were toward the center. The reservoir was 3 inches thick, and its rim was fashioned like the brim of a cup or a lily blossom. It could hold 11,000 gallons. He made 10 basins for washing, and he put 5 on the right and 5 on the left. The parts of the burnt offering were rinsed in them, but the reservoir was used by the priests for washing. He made the 10 gold lampstands according to their specifications and put them in the sanctuary, 5 on the right and 5 on the left. He made 10 tables and placed them in the sanctuary, 5 on the right and 5 on the left. He also made 100 gold bowls. He made the courtyard of the priests and the large court, the doors for the court, and he overlaid the doors with bronze. He put the reservoir on the right side toward the southeast. Then Huram made the posts, the shovels, and the bowls. So Huram finished doing the work that he was doing for King Solomon in God's temple. 2 pillars, the bowls and the capitals on top of the 2 pillars, the 2 gratings for covering both bowls of the capitals that were on top of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 gratings, 2 rows of pomegranates for each grating covering both capitals bowls on top of their pillars. He also made the water carts and the basins on the water carts. The 1 reservoir and the 12 oxen underneath it, the pots, the shovels, the forks, and all their utensils, Huram made them for King Solomon for the Lord's temple. All these were made of polished bronze. The king had them cast in clay molds in the Jordan Valley between Succoth and Zeradah. Solomon made all these utensils in such great abundance that the weight of bronze was not determined. Solomon also made all the equipment in God's temple, the gold altar, the temples on which to put the bread of the presence, the lampstands and their lamps of pure gold to burn in front of the inner sanctuary according to their specifications, the flowers, lamps, and gold tongs of purest gold, the wick trimmers, sprinkling basins, ladles, and the fire pans of purest gold, and the entryway to the temple, its inner doors to the most holy place, and the doors of the temple sanctuary of gold. May God richly bless the reading of his word. All right, more descriptions of the temple. Solomon is now through with it. Let's talk about our quote of the day. It comes from Martha Washington. She said, "I've learned from experience that the greater part of our happiness or misery depends on our dispositions and not on our circumstances." Isn't that so true? All right, I look forward to joining you again tomorrow. Until then, may God bless every step of every run and or walk. Go out there and shine your light.